So I think that's great. Dealing with these three cultures, how important was it instilled in you as a kid, like to have this identity of being Tamil? And did you feel like it was a challenge to reinforce that? Like as you mentioned, like you're dealing with folks who are similar, but they're not Tamil at school, and you're also like trying to learn English, and you obviously want to be accepted by, like your fellow students. So what was that like exercise like for you throughout the years?
Man, so I had pockets of the Tamil culture at home, right? We didn't even have Hindu temples that we could go to on Sundays. We had to go to the jinjas, or the local Japanese shrines. That's where my family took me, and they worshipped whatever deity that was there. But I'm sure my parents were envisioning Ganesh and Vishnu and Lakshmi and all those gods, right? That we're used to praying for. But there was only pockets of that, the Tamil culture that I had in my house. Luckily, because we were in Japan, it's not too far from India. I was able to visit India every summer. That's when I really got reconnected to my roots, right? I would spend the entire summer vacation with my grandparents and my uncles and aunts in my hometown of Tuticorin and also Chennai. I would oscillate between those two cities. That's when I really got engulfed into my original home, the mother. That was important for me because it kept me grounded, even though I was living in such an advanced country like Japan, right? And getting a very supremely advanced education in an international school, teaching English in Japan. It was very jarring, right, for me seeing like India in the 90s, like Tamil Nadu in the 90s, and then going to Japan, which is like a far one of the most advanced countries in the world, if not the most advanced, right? So it was very jarring to see, that kind of juxtaposition. And this is way before I was introduced to America, right? So for me, it was between India and Japan. The Tamil culture itself, that was where I got everything, like those summer vacations when I visited. That's when I got to go to the actual mandir, actual temples, eat actual homemade Indian food like adirasam and all those little sweets like my patis made. But it was hard, man. It was definitely hard because, like I said, majority of the year I was in a totally different type of environment. That was like the extent of the Tamil cultures that I got growing up.
Absolutely. And I know one thing that, folks who grow up away from their motherland struggle with is like, that you're lost because you're not embraced by folks when you go back home because, oh, you're not really like us. You didn't grow up here. You usually stereotypically don't speak the language as fluent. And when you go back to where you currently live, you're like, dang, I'm not cultured enough to where I fit in there, but I'm also not cool enough, to be embraced by the locals here. So it's like, yeah, I really just don't fit anywhere. So I guess what was that aspect of like navigating that? Because I know that's a challenge. And then obviously as a kid, more than any time in your life, you want to feel accepted and embraced.
Yeah, man. So, like I said, right, going and oscillating between those two countries was definitely a challenge because it really felt like there was a magnifying glass on all of my flaws as both an Indian, Tamil Indian kid, and also a Japanese kid trying to get an American education. So it felt like in either way, I was kind of failing. I was failing at being Tamil because I didn't speak Tamil enough. I didn't speak fluently, anywhere near fluently. It was all broken up. So, it was kind of a tough time dealing with the fact that I wasn't Tamil enough for my family. People ridiculed me all the time just with the broken Tamil stuff, and say that I wasn't, rooted in my culture enough. Even though that wasn't really my fault because it wasn't my fault, my decision to go to Japan or to grow up in Japan. And then in Japan, it was like also a challenge because I wasn't Japanese enough for the culture. Definitely didn't look the part. People would definitely look a little differently at me, literally because I looked nothing like them. And I didn't, I was still kind of learning English. I had an accent and everything. So those things were definitely challenging, man. Those things really made me feel like I didn't really belong, like in either culture. I guess America came along later on in my life, and that kind of helped me kind of mold into those things a little better and be more accepting of, who I was, as opposed to trying to fit in into something that I was trying too hard to fit into.
I really appreciate that sentiment, man. And I gotta ask, I think as a Tamil kid growing up, what was like your fondest first memory? Like whether it's like, the first Tamil movie you saw, the first taste of, Tamil culture, what was that stood out with you?
Bro, so like when we were in Japan, we would have these video cassettes that we'd bring from India each year. And
Yeah.
that was the way I watched all the Tamil movies. So as a kid, bro, like my mom, she would play me all these Rajini movies, right? And just Singing along to the Rajini songs as a kid, I absolutely loved. That was like my favorite thing to do. Right, I would be like singing it in the shower. I would be singing it on the way to school, and no other kids have any idea what I'm like singing. Right, and like the Orban Orban Mudalali song, the song in Muttu. That was like my childhood anthem, bro. Like I used to sing that song religiously. So just like seeing this like larger than life figure Rajini come onto the screen, and then I love doing that, and I love talking about it back when I went to India and those summer vacations, right? Then they would validate my fandom because then they would be like, yeah, he's huge, he's like the big superstar right now, and then me like trying to pose like him. Those are like my like a first like distinct memories I have being a Tamil kid, because I felt like I like watching Rajini in those movies and like singing along those songs kind of made me embrace being Tamil to like another level.
I relate 1000%, man. I think if you'd asked my family, I made them watch like Buddy about like a million times. That was my ish. Still is. So, I love that. And and I think too, with that, right? Balancing, these three different cultures, embracing your roots, like then moving now from Japan to US, like what do you think was the expectation, and like what were your interests in terms of like when people asked you what do you want to be when you grew up, like what was that original, let's say, 10-year-old answer that Shibu would give to folks?
Yeah, so to the last part, right? What I wanted to be when I grow up, right? It's very interesting. Apparently, I don't remember too much of this, but I can understand like certain family members have told me this. Apparently, when I was like around 10 years old, I wanted to be in the restaurant business, and like some of my favorite memories in Japan or even going back to India was going to restaurants and eating out, dining out with the family, right? Because I would see so many other families and I would see other people like congregating. And that's when I realized I just love being around people, right? So my like passion for being in a room full of people doing their thing, being in a lively atmosphere, that was what stemmed from my desire to be in restaurant business. Because everyone in a restaurant, for better or worse, they're happy. They're going out, they're spending money to eat food that they want to eat, that they're enjoying eating, right? So that I kind of liked seeing that. And so that was my first. That's what I wanted to do when someone asked me what I want to be when I grow up. Eventually, I kind of grew out of that phase. That was a childhood me, right? But I had no aspirations to be an artist or anything like that at that time yet. I was just like, nah, I just want to make it into the restaurant business. And then later, my parents they got into the typical, no, you got to be a doctor or you got to be engineer side of things, right? So they instilled that in me like as I grew a little older.
Totally not. I think, double culture, those are the two paths. I think the third one is now maybe it's starting to get more accepted as lawyer, but if you're not in the spectrum of those three, Houston, you have a problem, in some capacities. So I totally relate. But yeah, I know you mentioned that you didn't really see yourself producing music at that time. But were there any inklings, like for example, do you like to draw? Like, were there any sort of creative interests that really resonated with you at that age, where you're like, I like doing this more than like like doing like sports or something else after school or even in school? Where there like was art a subject that you really was drawn to? Drawn to?
So as a kid, I never wanted to. I never thought I would want to be an artist, an actual artist full time. But I would always be singing a lot more than most of the kids in class. I would always be singing more. I would always be like, but at the same time, I was a very shy kid, right? So I wasn't like going out of my way to pursue, choir or like singing lessons. Or I was still shy, but I was always singing. I was always singing more songs than the average kid, whether it was like the Rajini songs or whether it was the J-pop, Japanese pop songs I was listening to, or even like Backstreet Boys or whoever was popping at over Japanese radio. So that was the first sign that I wanted to be in the music industry, even though I didn't know it yet. Then eventually in high school, that's when I really started having a huge passion for film.